should be us. I'm going live. The old internet.
Here we are.
There we are indeed. Sound working? Is the sound working?
It says it's working.
Kind of. Says it's kind of working.
What's up, everybody?
What's up indeed?
Welcome into the regular weekly co-main event podcast, Patreon live chat. You know who we are. We know who you are. And we're here for the next 60 minutes to respond to your questions in the comments, just like we always do.
About this time.
About this time.
This week, Colleen lets us know she is first.
She's always first.
Almost always. It's real internet throwback thing that we're apparently doing. Only here. Only on the co-main event Patreon page, I feel. Nowhere else are people still doing first in comments.
We're bringing it back. Everything comes around again. What's old is new again.
Apparently. Okay. And we're going to get right into it via Tribeless, who writes, if you could disinvent one thing, what would it be? My initial gut reaction to this was the smartphone, but I eventually settled on nuclear weapons. I really like how just different those two things are, but I could see the argument for both.
Yeah.
However, did you ever listen to that Dan Carlin hardcore history thing on like the history of nuclear weapons?
No.
It does at least toy with the idea that we haven't had a world war since we got them. We just don't, I mean, we still have plenty of wars. It's not like we're not fighting and killing each other over silly shit at times. But we haven't done the big scale version ever since it became a thing where a few different countries have the ability to just wipe shit off the map completely.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And we're to the point now, like it used to be when we were kids, like in the 80s and stuff, it would be like, well, okay, eventually a huge nuclear exchange between world superpowers is going to happen, and that's what's going to doom humanity. And now, we're like, man, we don't even need to get to that point. We'll just do it all on our own.
All on our own self.
Just factories and cars and stuff.
Remember War Games?
Yes.
The film with Matthew Broderick?
Yes.
It's a good movie.
I don't know if
I don't know if it would hold up, but it was good at the time when I was
Is that going to be your next movie club pick?
No.
I swear to God.
I tried in a lot of the bands that I was in to get our name to be Falcon's Maze, which is one of the games that is on the list. Like when Matthew Broderick goes into the Whopper and it gives him a list of games you can play. It's like chess, checkers, Falcon's Maze, thermonuclear war. So I really wanted to be in a band called Falcon's Maze, but no one would ever go for it.
You couldn't find enough other nerds to be in a band with you?
And I guess in fairness, that band name sounds like it would be the name of like a math rock band.
It sounds to me like really slow grinding heavy metal.
Yeah, maybe that too. We never did it though. We never pulled the trigger on Falcon's Maze.
Well,
I would go maybe internal combustion engine.
Wow. You're going way back.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the fork in the road in a lot of ways, right? For where we are today, like organized human civilization decided to go with the internal combustion engine. And now there's no winter in New Jersey anymore, according to an article in the New York Times yesterday.
You're assuming, though, that if you just get rid of that's the tricky part of the premise of this question, is if you just take that one thing out.
Yeah.
Do we not just a couple years later invent something that's just as bad, if not worse, to fill that niche?
I mean, the butterfly effect, man. Right?
Smartphones is actually a good one to disinvent. Because it's like, wow, it's hard to imagine living your life without it.
Yeah.
Like I had to take my phone in to get a new battery put in. And it was like I was without it for like 3 hours. It was really weird to be without my phone for 3 hours. Yeah. Also, taking it in to get like serviced. And I asked the guy, how will you let me know when it's ready? And he was like, oh, I'll call you. And I was like, but you'll have my phone. And he was like, oh, like, is there another way that we could contact you? And I was like, oh, over email. And he was like, yeah, we don't do email. I was like, you're the tech people. You've got computers all around here, man. I know you've got email on your phone. How about, I already wrote down my email address in several different forms. How about you just take your phone out? No one has to know. Just shoot me an email. Be like, psst, it's ready. I'll come get it.
Yeah. Sometimes I leave my phone at home on purpose, though, just to have a liberated experience out in the world.
What do you do on these liberated experiences?
I take a walk.
Okay.
Drive around. Just be out there experiencing the world.
Either taking a walk or driving around.
Yeah.
Just fucking wild man out there.
Well, I mean, what did you want me to do? Take a bunch of peyote and get naked, smear myself in my own feces, jump the fence and run around in the train yard?
I could do without the feces part, but everything else sounds kind of awesome.
Yeah. To each his own, my friend.
All right, Matt Evans says, years ago there was a tried and tested way to stand out in the UFC which didn't require fighters to act like dickheads all the time. It was to dye your hair bright green. Like the George W. Bush administration, I hated it at the time, but it now seems harmless relative to the contemporary alternative.
Yeah.
Is there any chance of return to those more innocent types? Now, there is something to this. Not necessarily the dyed bright green. I mean, Tito Ortiz dyed his hair.
The bleach blonde hair was like Tito's thing. That's how you knew where he was.
Who was Jonathan Goulet would dye his hair in like crazy colors?
Well, I mean,
like
let's not overlook Chris Lieben.
No.
Whose like whole thing was that he dyed his hair bright red.
Yes.
Like, that was kind of how you knew who he was.
I think, is it that we as a society, we just don't even really notice you dyeing your hair funky colors anymore because so many people dye their hair funky colors?
Yeah, kind of like tattoos. Everyone has tattoos, so it's sort of like doesn't really set you apart anymore.
No. I was talking with somebody recently about how one of my old man opinions, I feel, is that like sometimes I'll find myself driving around and grumbling like an old man, being like, everybody now with their purple hair, dyed purple hair, the dyed green. And it's not so much the dyed hair, but it was like back when I was a youth, you had to have the big personality to match the crazy funky hair.
Yeah.
And now, girl who works the front desk at the YMCA got bright purple hair, and it's just not even a thing. Just like she's not like got safety pins through her lip. She's not like trying to send a message or anything. She's just like she's doing purple hair, and what? It's no big deal.
How about this though? Do you think just specifically in MMA have we progressed to the point, circling back to everything old being new again, where we are once again ready for a new force with green or red or bleach blonde hair to burst onto the scene? Like, what if Easy Dos Santos suddenly had bleach blonde hair?
Okay.
What if, like, Yair Rodriguez was suddenly rocking, like, a bright green mohawk?
Bright green mohawk.
I mean, just so you knew who they were, right? So you'd be like, oh, yeah, that's the bright green mohawk guy. I like him.
I feel like we need you to have that mohawk when we first become aware of you.
No, yeah, you might want to do it before you... It's like changing your name all of a sudden. Mid-career, now all of a sudden you're
like Anthony
Rocco Martin, which
with the big ass chops. That one works.
That's working for him.
Yeah.
It's working for him, but you can't. Not everyone can get away with it. We would also be remiss, would we not, if we did not point out that much of Chuck Liddell's overall public persona was based on the fact that he had a mohawk.
Yeah,
and like
the Chuck Hawk,
Fu Manchu mustache.
Yep, that was. I mean, that was what stood in where a personality should be for Chuck Liddell in many ways. Is like hair stuff. And it's also tough. We would also be remiss if we did not point out that the Reebok thing makes it harder also. Because it wasn't just that Tito Ortiz had the dyed blonde hair. It had dyed bleach blonde hair and the flame shorts. Chuck Liddell had the Mohawk Fu Manchu and the blue Iceman shorts.
Right.
You know, BJ Penn had the white shorts with the black belt painted on it. Like, that contributed to people being able to come up with like a signature look. Here's how you'll remember me. I'm the guy that wears this and looks like this. And now you can really, like, your hair is one of the last things you kind of have control over. That and tattoos.
Yeah. And tattoos are kind of done to death at this point. Like, basically, we know Conor McGregor's tattoo.
If you want to have a distinctive tattoo, you can't have too many tattoos. You like Fernando Prates said about one of the guys, can't remember who it was, some fighter on a recent like prelim, that he looks like he walked into the tattoo parlor and just was like, give me that whole wall.
I'll take page 3.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
You need the gorilla, the big ass gorilla on the chest, or the Brock Lesnar sword on the chest. You need something. You need to just pare it down a little bit so we can focus in.
Brock Lesnar's sword is hard to miss.
It is.
Especially since Brock Lesnar doesn't seem like a dude who should have a giant sword tattooed on his chest. He just he doesn't seem like a tattoo guy.
No, he doesn't.
I mean?
No. Aruj Islam says, number 1, there's 2 parts here. I know following MMA is even more of a blur when you are paid to cover the sport like you guys, but am I off in thinking that UFC 241 incites the big fight week tingle that no MMA card has since McGregor-Khabib? 3 really good fights at the top of the card where no fighter is even a 2-1 favorite, where the outcomes matter and aren't predictable, and where several fighters are coming back from year plus long layoffs. Romero, Costa, Stipe, Diaz.
Yeah.
And then 2, is Nate Diaz the biggest star in MMA history who has never won a major championship or has had his popularity defined by either a title reign or the chase of a title other than Kimbo, of course.
Yeah. I mean, UFC 241 does feel like the most momentous UFC event in a little while. It definitely has like a big event feel. I don't know what the buy rate will be, obviously, but I think to those
No
of
one
us
will ever know because it's ESPN Plus.
inside the bubble, it definitely feels like this is a big one, and it's going to be a good one. And the card is a bit of a throwback in terms of how stacked it is. So yeah, I think that it does produce that tingle. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the big fight tingle. It does for me. And I was in thinking about it when I was looking at this, what the summer lineup has been. For me, it feels like the summer has just kind of gone by in a blur here.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think of, okay, what's the, like, this is, I think, better than UFC 240 was, the Max Holloway Frankie Edgar one.
Yeah.
Better, I think, overall than UFC 239, Jones versus Santos, the 4th of July weekend one. It's hard to even, you had to go back and look at the card to make sure. That was Jones, Amanda Nunes, Holly Holm, Jones, Thiago Santos.
I mean, that was a good one. That was a good
one. I mean,
one.
it really panned out, especially Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren.
Yeah.
Really,
I mean, just on paper, 241 is better.
Yeah. But yeah, it does seem like one of the biggest events of the summer, and then leading into a pretty busy fall season where you got Khabib, Poirier, that kind of stuff going on. But covering the fights for a living really helps you distinguish that big fight tingle, because it makes you realize, like, okay, this one does not feel like work at all. Like, this one feels like really looking forward to this and really can't wait for fight night to get here. Whereas, like, the Shevchenko-Carmouche fight card, where you're like, okay, it's on. I guess, like, we'll do this. I guess that's what we're doing.
And it's not one where you have to be like, shit, where even is it? What time is it on?
Right.
Do I have to be there at, like, do I have to be on my couch at, like, noon or whatever?
Yes, yeah.
For it to start, you know what it is. So, yeah. And as far as Nate Diaz is concerned, I mean, my gut reaction is yes, but then there's part of me that feels like there obviously is a lot of attention around both Diaz brothers, and since Nick is kind of maybe retired but has been AWOL for a while, Nate kind of carries the mantle now for those guys. But part of me is like, what metrics do we have that Nate is like a big star aside from
his participation in 2 of the biggest,
right? Like, aside from the McGregor fights, like those, he definitely sold the shit out of those. Like, do we think he definitely, like, upped his profile, raised his profile from those 2 fights? But, like, I'm not trying to say he's not a big star, but I'm not sure that we have a lot of great data on, like, how big a draw he is.
Yeah. Well, part of it is that he hasn't fought since the second McGregor fight, so it's not like we get a chance to see what he has done without McGregor around. And if people are going to make the claim Nate Diaz isn't a big star because he only did big pay-per-view numbers because Conor McGregor did big pay-per-view numbers, then are you saying Conor McGregor can fight his way out of a wet paper bag and a million people are going to pay to see it?
No, I mean,
you need somebody.
You don't want to discount him that much. Like, Nate Diaz, obviously, he was almost like the perfect foil for Conor McGregor, and the 2 of them working together just made magic.
And it was the kind of magic where it didn't feel like a international ethnic blood feud was about to break out either. It was just like kind of fun trash talk for the most part.
Yeah, and, like, frankly, that's one of the reasons why I kind of still feel like I want to watch Jorge Masvidal fight Conor McGregor, because I feel like you put those 2 guys on stage together for a bunch of for a world tour, so to speak, a promotional world tour, like they like to say with McGregor, and I feel like they would just make magic together. I feel like you would do a huge buy rate with that fight, and there's such a contrast of styles, just in terms of the trash talking game, that I feel like it would be really interesting. And then on top of that, like, probably an entertaining fight.
Yeah, I think Nate Diaz gives you all the Diaz stuff, but in a way more dependable than Nick, just because he'll show up for interviews. He doesn't do a ton of them either, but, like, he had that sit down with Brett Okamoto, which, as we were talking about off air before, shout out to your boy Brett Okamoto, who sits down with a Diaz brother and thinks right off the bat, first question, let me make a Moby Dick reference.
Yep, Melville.
Yeah, let me ask him about, let me compare him to the white whale from Melville's Moby Dick, because that's something I feel like is you're talking. You think Nate Diaz, you think the works of Herman Melville.
That's right. I expected Diaz to respond to that question by being like, well, Brett, in my time off, I spent some time familiarizing myself with the works of Herman Melville.
Yeah.
And I feel that is an apt comparison. I applaud you, sir.
I honestly, I feel I'm more of a Bartleby the Scrivener type than I am the white whale. But I lived like Nate chuckling awkwardly for a moment and then being like, I don't know what a white whale is.
Yeah. I mean, that went exactly like you thought it would.
But yeah, I mean, it is interesting to have somebody, because Nate Diaz and Nick Diaz both, like, they kind of show you that a lot of the stuff about getting people excited for fights and getting people excited about particular fighters, that it's not just about performance and wins and losses, because they don't win them all.
Yeah.
They don't even, like, I wrote a column about it talking about how he's somebody like his brother who isn't even necessarily going to always fight to his advantage. Like, is pretty predictable in what he's going to do, even when it wouldn't be a great idea for him. And yet, it does like generate an excitement, because I think like when he comes back after 3 years away, there's a feeling for people like, okay, I know this guy. I remember getting excited about this guy. I have feelings like about like where I feel invested one way or another and how his fights go. You match him up with somebody else who has an exciting style, and hell yeah, I'll watch that.
Yeah.
Alexander Moffat says, we have not seen a heel figure in women's MMA like Chael Sonnen or Colby Covington. I think that would help the division to get more exposure. Do you expect it to happen at some point? To which Mr. Dog replies, Ronda?
Question mark.
She did kind of do it,
yeah.
Especially when she was first coming to prominence, like in Strikeforce. That was one of the big things, was that she was really talking a bunch of shit, calling people out, that kind of stuff, which, as you had noted previously in the women's division, everybody too motherfucking nice. Nobody was really doing that. And she really kind of jumped the line for a few people who felt like they had better claims to a Strikeforce title shot. Like I think Sarah Kaufman had kind of a better claim to it. And the powers that be got really excited about Ronda Rousey for good reason. They're like, okay, here's somebody, she's talking a good game, she's got the look, she can finish the fights. Yeah, let's go ahead and fast track her right into that title shot. And it was, I think, especially because people got used to the way women's MMA was working at the time, kind of surprising to a lot of people, where they were like, whoa, wait a minute. This is not how this stuff usually goes.
Yeah. And I was on record early on in the development of the UFC's women's roster saying everybody was too motherfucking friendly. Like that was one of the promotional problems with it. It didn't fully, I mean, I knew everybody knew what Ronda's persona was, and like that she had this kind of like rebel attitude that she was capitalizing on, and was outspoken and would say what she thought. It didn't fully dawn on me until she lost how many people did not like her, or seemingly how many people were at the ready to make a meme, kind of. Like,
yeah,
so many people on the edge of their seats waiting for her to get knocked out so they could just jump all over it on the internet. I was honestly at the time somewhat taken aback by the outpouring.
Taken aback?
Yeah, by the outpouring of like glee and hate almost for her as a figure in the immediate wake of her loss.
How much of that do you think was that she just kind of came by it honestly by being a larger than life figure who, beating Betch Kohei and telling her don't cry, and not afraid to rub it in other people's faces when she beats them, kind of thing? And how much of it do you think that by the time that she lost to Holly Holm, she had come to be kind of synonymous with like Dana White's favorite and preferential treatment, all that kind of stuff? And so it was like, okay, there's some people who are always just kind of gonna root against whatever it seems like the UFC wants.
Yeah, I really honestly don't know. I have no idea how to answer that. I mean, she demonstrated a lot of qualities that we applaud in other fighters, right? Like we love the Diaz brothers for what they do,
right?
Flipping the bird and slapping people in the face.
Remember, she was a Diaz brother and a beautiful fucking body.
I was trying to avoid saying that specific
fucking body.
I was trying to
Diaz brother in there and that body, Chad.
Trying to avoid that phrase. I was trying to avoid that phrase, but that's what was said. So, an accurate retelling of the phrase, sir.
The thing that she did not do well, and that she probably could have, the memes were still going to get made, but I don't know if we've ever seen a big UFC star on that level do worse at handling losses.
Yeah, I mean that also did not help.
Like, not gonna, even not gonna show up to a press conference afterwards. Gonna show up walking through the airport with a pillow over your face, that kind of stuff. And it was like, okay. Then when Misha Tate lost her belt and she showed up to the press conference with an ice pack on her nose, like blood still leaking out of her nose, to answer questions about it, and you're like, okay, there's a stark contrast for you.
Yeah.
Cliff says, have either of you been asked to be on Ariel Helwani's MMA Reporters podcast? If not, what the hell is that guy's problem? No, I'm not. No.
Are they mostly? I haven't listened to it, so I don't know. But I thought they mostly are doing that like in person, or do they have people on the?
I don't know.
Do they get people on Skype or whatever? I don't know. But no, answer is no.
Yeah, and I would think that they would do mostly like ESPN, like fellow ESPN people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I haven't listened to it, but I mean, a lot of that, like the stuff they used to do, the MMA beat stuff that they used to do on MMA fighting, if you notice, it was mostly either people who were employees of the company or who at least lived in the area, and they know we're not leaving Montana for something like that just to do your show. I mean, we were already in the area, maybe. Devin Scott says, I expect to be entertained by the fights at UFC 241. However, I am fully prepared to be saddened by the likelihood that both DC and Nate Diaz are going to lose. If they both lose, where do they go from there? Okay, that is a sobering possibility.
Yeah.
And a not at all far-fetched possibility that they both lose.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about Nate Diaz, though, being in some ways outside wins and losses. So, like, and especially maybe I feel a little bit more mentally prepared for it since he's coming in, like, off such a long layoff. We're not sure exactly what to expect from him in his return. We talked about it on Monday that it seems like maybe if Anthony Pettis fights a smart fight, maybe he'll have some advantages there. And maybe it just feels like there's kind of like less at stake there. Like
Yeah.
We do these Diaz brothers fights for fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody likes to watch a Diaz brother come out and do their thing. So I feel like if Nate Diaz loses, but it's an entertaining fight, and Anthony Pettis gets to do his stuff and Diaz does his stuff, I feel like we will all regard it as a good time. I feel like there's a lot more substantive stuff riding on the heavyweight championship fight, where like if DC wins, there are a lot of questions like, will he retire? Would he fight Francis Ngannou?
Would he fight John Jones again?
I know John Jones just sort of like poured cold water on that on Twitter this week, but I don't necessarily know that means anything. And all of those possibilities in some way vanish if he loses.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about on Monday, like I really like Stipe Miocic as a human, and like he's a great fighter, but a win here by him in many ways returns the UFC heavyweight division sort of like to the status quo.
Yes.
And whereas DC has been like a fun heavyweight champ and like a feel-good story, and there, like I said, there's interesting stuff out there for him to do if he wins, and if he loses, like. We already saw Stipe versus Ngannou. It doesn't seem like John Jones wants to go up to heavyweight just to have a fight against Stipe Miocic. So I feel like emotionally, at least, I have more riding on DC and the storylines around the heavyweight division than I do around Pettis and Diaz.
If DC loses, do you take it as a foregone conclusion that he retires after that?
Impossible to say, right? Impossible to say.
Because you could see how... Well, I don't know. Maybe it would depend on the UFC's and fans' appetite for a rubber match. But also, I could see how DC, since he already kind of wanted to be done by a round now, would be like, okay, well, that's that then.
Yeah.
I'll take my money and my broadcasting job and I'll be content with that. I could also see how the competitor in him would be like, I don't feel great about that, going out on a loss, especially when I think I can beat Stipe and I already have beat him once. I don't know.
And like, I guess if he loses, like, what's the fight? I guess he could do Miocic a third time because they would be 1-1 against each other.
That's what I mean by the rubber match
Yeah.
interest. But then I don't know what there would be, depending on like how the fight ended. But if Stipe like knocked him out in the third round or something, I don't know if there'd be a ton of people might be like, okay, mathematically, I can see the rubber match makes sense, but it's not like I just gotta have it. Like, I can't imagine my life without another DC Stipe fight.
Especially if it is like, if Stipe wins like a clear-cut, overwhelming, like unanimous decision win, right? Where like it's clear that he's just too big,
Yeah.
and like too much of a natural heavyweight for DC. Whereas I think that, like, if DC won a dominant unanimous decision over Miocic, it might well be one of the great performances of all time. We'll have to see how it goes.
I will say that if Nate Diaz loses, it would probably be by decision, and he would probably afterwards find a lot of ways to explain why it was bullshit.
Yeah.
That would be my prediction there. Abdel Jalil says, anyone notice that Ashley Judd in Heat looks like Antonina Shevchenko? That's actually not bad. There is a resemblance there.
Yeah.
I am prepared to make the argument that when we're going to record the CME Movie Club right after this, I'm prepared to make the argument that Ashley Judd, I'm not going to say she's the worst actor in this movie, but she does the worst acting performance in Heat.
There's a weird accent thing going on.
There is.
There's actually a weird accent thing going on in both of the, like, two of the three female leads in Heat.
The other one is like a southern accent thing.
Yeah. Edie. Which makes you wonder if they told her that her name was Edie and she just thought she would go full Edie Brickell in the new Bohemians with like a southern accent.
Okay. Wasn't prepared for that.
And, well, it's the 90s, dude.
Mid-90s.
Who's more 90s than Edie Brickell in the new Bohemians?
Ashley Judd has that one scene where when Robert De Niro confronts her when he sees that she's sleeping with Hank Azaria, and he tells her like she's going to go back to Val Kilmer, and she's like, "No, it's too late. I'm sick of it." And you're like, "Come on, what is this? Yeah. This is like community theater quality acting. Is it supposed to be bad? Ashley Judd, you're a real actor. What are you doing?"
There's also
want to do a take two on that.
Yeah, maybe they didn't have time. Maybe they're like, we still got 3 hours of movie to shoot.
This storyline is not that important.
Not to give away the company store here, but some real 90s male-female relationships in Heat. Mm-hmm. A lot of stuff for the dudes to do in Heat.
Yeah.
Not a ton for the female actors there.
We'll have some commentary on that in the movie club. Should we say on the live chat what our next movie club choices are? Maybe for people who are on the fence about if they wanted to get in on the movie club.
Okay.
Are you prepared to do that?
I guess I need to make a decision. I got a few contenders in my mind's eye.
I'm going to tell you what my choice is. This is the one. I'm very excited about this. I really want this to work out. Say that right now, mostly because I want Chad to have to watch it and then talk about it. I am choosing 2015 The Witch. Written and directed by Robert Eggers.
Okay.
It is ostensibly a horror film. Now, I don't really like horror films very often, but I was talked into watching this one, and I fucking loved it. And it has a lot to talk about and a lot of stuff to discuss. And it's not like it is a movie set in 1630s New England, like pre Salem witch trials, but not that far pre. Mm-hmm. And there's witchcraft involved. It is a really well done horror film with a lot of really good character actors, and it's super good. And it's streaming free on Netflix, which Heat was not. You declined to mention. Well, had to rent it for $3.99.
After it turned out like 5 rounds into this thing, nobody gives a shit. When I started out, I was like, I'm gonna try to pick stuff that's free on Netflix. And it turned out like nobody cared. Everyone was just going to go with whatever they wanted to watch.
All the shit you gave me, you go with something that's not that.
Here is a pragmatic question. What if The Witch is just too scary and I can't watch it?
Well, we'll discuss that as well.
What if I'm like, I got 15 minutes in and I had to turn it off?
Well, first of all, you're going to probably take some flack for that.
I mean, I don't like watching scary stuff, man.
It's not like boom, jump out at you scary.
Yeah.
It is more like slowly unfolding psychologically scary. And it's just really well done, well shot. And the setting, the time period, all that stuff contributes a lot to the heightened tension. And I'm totally into it. The Witch. Everybody vote for The Witch. Let's see if Chad Dundas can make it through without getting too scared.
Oh, I don't know. See, now we know which one's going to win. But I'm going 2003 Lost in Translation.
What?
Just a different direction.
That is a very different direction.
Bill Murray.
We all know. We know this one.
Yeah.
Everybody heard of Lost in Translation.
Scarlett Johansson, directed by Sofia Coppola.
She won an Academy Award for that, didn't she?
She did. Speaking of bad acting performances, Sofia Coppola in Godfather 3, that ain't good. That's not good. That's bad acting.
Man, I think I blocked out all memory of anything in Godfather 3. There's just no reason to ever think about it.
Lost in Translation, 2003. A comedy, offbeat. Your boy Bill Murray, who everyone loves.
Comedy? You're going to call it a comedy?
Yeah, it's a comedy.
It's a comedy where...
Oh, it says drama actually here in the IMDb page.
In the sense that like there are a few moments where you go, huh, at Bill Murray. At only Bill Murray. And that's it. It's like when you're typing like LOL and what you really mean is like, my mouth did this a little bit when I read your message. Clever. Anyway, The Witch. Mr. Dog says, what's up with that Bleacher Report journalist J.E. Snowden saying that all MMA fans and journalists are immoral for enjoying the sport of MMA? Do you guys agree? Also, why would someone with those views continue to do that job? To which Dak Wassan replies, Snowden is the platonic ideal of just saying shit. Has he said this? You probably
yeah, I mean,
know better than I am.
He,
That's his position? Is that it's immoral and everybody involved in it, from fans to media to...
I don't want to speak for the man, but I think that it is his position about a lot of sports. That like we are actively encouraging people to participate in stuff that is physically not good for them, and that often leaves them worse off than they were before, and that in some ways we are all complicit with the violence.
Okay. So you make the same argument about pro football.
Yeah, you can make the same argument about a lot of sports, which is one of the things that I feel like makes it both true and also the widespread nature of it to me makes it seem like it's an argument that we have already decided, like in our minds.
To me, it just feels like a cop-out. It feels like you're saying, well, hey, look, we're already bad people just for being here, so screw it. Like, there's no point in trying to be better people or better versions of ourselves. There's no point in asking the sport to treat people better or more fairly. Or, there's no point in pointing out the hypocrisies or the abuses and exploitation that take place within it. Just instead roll around in the awfulness of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, in many ways, I see his point, because I do feel like there's a lot of stuff involved in this sport specifically that you have to kind of make peace with as a fan. But at the same time, like, I see your point as well, just because I feel like a lot of the issues in the sport are stuff that we should be working to try to resolve and lessen the impact of in as many ways as we can. The violence in and of itself is obviously inherent in the sport and something that's probably here to stay. And
the violence is where the human drama of it comes from.
Sure, yeah.
Like, you can't remove that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's different even than like in football, where like there are ways you could definitely make football safer without losing the core essence of the game itself.
Yeah.
I think. But with fighting, it's like the simplistic kind of like one person against another nature of it, and this is how we're going to figure this out, like in this sport without the metaphor sense. Like, the violence is necessary.
Yeah. I guess in some ways I don't really know how I feel about that argument, because I think that there are aspects of it that are true, but I also feel like you could make that argument about a lot of things in life. Like, I feel like you could in some ways make a similar argument about like going to the bar, right?
Yes.
Or just like buying clothes that were made in overseas and likely by sweatshop labor, or like having an iPhone, which may have been constructed by, in some ways, like people that aren't earning very much money.
Like one step above slave labor.
Yeah, conscripted in some ways. So like, I feel like I'm sensitive to that argument, but at the same time, I think you can make it on a lot of different fronts.
It just to me feels like making it is a way to kind of like give yourself an out from having to think about it, which I think we've talked before about what is the responsibility of the fan in dealing with all this. And I think the responsibility of the fan is to confront it honestly, not let it drift out of your mind so far that you never think about the actual physical consequences or the human consequences of this sport. To like understand and be honest with yourself about what it is. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that necessarily means that you have to be like, and it's garbage and we're all garbage, and therefore like I never have to think about any of the ethical stuff, like any of the ethical questions involved, because I've just decided that it all sucks.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Brady Griffin says, "Come on, guys, The Room better be on the next movie club poll. I will not stop trolling the live chat until this gets on." It's another horror one, isn't it?
Is it? I thought
know.
Isn't The Room like one of the one that is like renowned as one of the worst movies of all time? Like,
really?
that it's super famous for being so bad.
I don't know. I feel like I've heard of it, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, The Room.
2003 American romantic drama film, written, directed, produced, and starring Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah, that's the one. Like, so
Okay,
bizarre.
that's not what I thought it was.
So bizarre and terrible that it's like
Wow.
a cult classic. In a way.
3.7 stars out of 10 on IMDb. I don't know if I've ever seen a rating that low. This does not seem like anything I want to watch. You might just have to keep trolling the live chat on that one, because I don't know. Colin Keith says, "Forget UFC 241. We got Ryzen 18 this weekend, guys. Gucci Gang in action and some top super atomweight women's fights as well. Also, Justin Scoggins, Jared Brooks, Takeo Mizugaki too. Is this card on your radar at all?" No, not really. I mean, I can look it up right now, but man, somebody was asking about this recently, and I think maybe in the mailbag about like how come it feels like ONE FC is able to get some attention from like North American fans and North American fight media, and Ryzen really doesn't. And I think part of it is that, at least like from the media perspective, I feel like I'm constantly getting stuff from ONE FC.
Yeah,
like
they're a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, like almost every day I get an email, and they're like more accessible. Like you can reach out, and they have like somebody you can talk to, even though the time difference is always a huge issue, because it's like, I'm awake, and they're like, we're just turning in. And Ryzen, you never really hear anything from.
Yeah,
they don't seem to care that much.
I honestly don't know who works for Ryzen. Like, ONE FC has contacts that you can reach out to,
and everybody
I
knows
know who they are.
Yeah.
And Ryzen, I don't even know if they have like an English language representative or someone who like you can contact about interviews or something like that. Honestly, my eyes have been opened a lot more after I did that story for The Athletic about people that really like international MMA, particularly as it pertains to like KSW, which was not necessarily a thing that had been on my radar before that. But after I talked to people who were so hyped about it for so long, like then I started to feel a little hyped about it, and I've watched some of their stuff, and like it is super entertaining. I feel like one of the realities of my life, and especially having the job that I have, is that like there's only so much mixed martial arts that can occupy my attention.
Yeah.
And like one of the things about the UFC's blanket schedule at this point is that like it honestly doesn't leave a ton of room for other stuff, which is like has a suffocating effect almost on like the rest of the industry. And in some ways that's obviously not fair. That's why like sometimes on the podcast, on weeks when Bellator and the UFC both have events and you feel like on a limited basis that maybe Bellator's event is just as interesting, I feel like it's justified to spend more time talking about Bellator. And the same thing is probably true of ONE FC or Ryzen. It's just like I honestly sometimes feel like I don't have room in my life for it. So I am in this position where I have to like, it has to be one of those things where I go back and catch up on the things that are interesting and notable.
Yeah. Just skip around, and then we'll come back. But I want to get to this question from Molly Melling, who asks, "How do I explain to my loser boyfriend that we super like Stipe, but interrupting DC's career Saturday would be mean and bad?" Now, see, this is actually a good, like, I feel a lot of people probably feel this way. Because we're, like, you can't really dislike Stipe too much.
No.
I feel like some people turned on him a little bit when they were like, oh, you sat out all this time after losing it and just constantly talked about nothing except giving you another title shot and didn't want to fight anybody else in the meantime. But then that worked, so I think he was kind of proven out in that one. And it's impossible really to have too many bad feelings about Steve because he seems like a nice guy. In many ways embodies the kind of qualities that we say we want to get behind in a fighter. Not great at the interview portion of the game. Not great at the mic skills stuff, but all right still. Nobody's really, I feel like, against Stipe, but it's true that, especially with DC where he is now, where he's so close to the end, any fight could be the last fight. And we all really love DC, man. He's just such a lovable guy.
Yeah.
And we also, like, there's a part of me that thinks that, like, we're all looking at this as, like, okay, if we get through this one, If DC can still have the strap after this one, then we get into some interesting next questions.
Right. Yeah, and it's like all that stuff that I talked about earlier about like our potential excitement for DC versus Francis Ngannou, or maybe the at this point somewhat more distant opportunity to have DC versus Jones at heavyweight, which I think would be a huge fight and a big kind of a spectacle and a point of interest in a lot of ways. And we lose that if DC loses the title. And on top of that, what you said about everybody, like DC is such a feel-good story. A guy who worked his whole life and was always right at the top of whatever sport he was in, whether it was amateur wrestling or professional mixed martial arts, and could never like win that gold medal or win that title. And when he got the interim light heavyweight title, it was largely discounted because obviously he didn't beat John Jones to win it. And so then he moves up to heavyweight and he has this amazing performance against Stipe Miocic to win it. We're all just like overjoyed. One of the great feel-good stories in the history of the sport, probably. So now
we don't get a lot of those.
Right. So now like the opportunity or the potential for him to just lose a rematch to Stipe Miocic kind of seems like,
and you're right. Go back to status quo and
that'll
just,
be a downer.
Right back to how we were before.
Plus, like, what's DC gonna do? He's gonna win like he's gonna have like two more. Let's say he beats Stipe, he's gonna win like two more fights, and then he'd probably retire. Stipe Miocic at that point will probably go right back to being the UFC heavyweight champion.
Yeah. Do you think that Molly's loser boyfriend can understand it in those terms?
I hope so. I hope we said it in terms that he can understand.
If not, Molly, maybe he doesn't deserve you. Let's think about that.
Wow, don't break up with your boyfriend based on an offhand comment by Ben Foltz made on
you know what?
live
I
chat
think what you should do is break up with your boyfriend and join the army. Not just let's just change everything. Unless you're already in the army, in which case I think you should go AWOL.
You would be better off calling a telephone psychic than listening to this man right now.
Maybe I should become a telephone psychic. They still do that? Still got those telephone psychics?
Hard for me to believe that's a thing. Although maybe in big cities.
Okay, Matt Evans says, Chad's Vanilla Ice story reminded me of a question I've always had about Meatloaf. On formal occasions, does he require people to call him Mr. Loaf? Separately, have you ever met someone famous without initially realizing it? It happened to me once in 1998, shortly after the release of the Bond movie Tomorrow Never Dies. I was living in Hong Kong at the time, and while out drinking one night, I saw a beautiful woman at the end of the bar. I decided to impress her with the question, has anyone ever said that you look like Michelle Yeoh? I don't know how to pronounce that.
Michelle Yeoh?
Michelle Yeoh?
I think so.
You know who that is?
She's an actress.
Okay. She replied, I am Michelle Yeoh. That ever happened to you?
Not in that way. When I was living in New York, and I was working at the Barnes and Noble at like 53rd and 3rd in the Citibank Center, lots of television, like news personalities used to come in there a lot because it was like right in the neighborhood. So they would go in there and like buy magazines or whatever. And I would always, if I was working the cash register and they would like come in and pay and leave, I'd be like, who was that person? And it was always like Greta Van Susteren or somebody like that. And later I would find out who they were, but never at the moment. I've also, like I saw Quentin Tarantino in the lobby of the Bellagio when I was in Vegas one time. And it was one of these things where like we passed by each other. And I was like, that was a weird looking dude. And then I was like, oh, that's Quentin Tarantino. But he was gone by that time. And it's not like I was going to chase him down and act like a fool. Got to act like you've been there before.
Yeah.
I also, when Henry Rollins, Heat tie-in, by the way, when Henry Rollins did like a spoken word thing at the University of Montana, this is probably like 20 years ago now, I went to it and passed Henry Rollins as he was coming out of the bathroom. I was going in, and like my initial thought as it happened was like, who is that tiny little dude who looks just like Henry Rollins? And then I was like, that was Henry Rollins. He's about this tall. It's crazy. And then you'll notice in Heat, he doesn't stand next to anybody. In Heat, he is filmed from a low angle, and like he's always really distant from all the other actors.
So maybe when he gets bodied by Al Pacino, it seems a little more believable.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing
Either
about
one of them a big dude.
I mean, Henry Rollins is ripped and super strong, but he's not a big dude. He's a little tiny guy.
I remember, since I grew up in Southern California, it was not that crazy to see like movie stars or just like people in the movies around, especially like if you were anywhere in the like LA, Hollywood area, like, you know, going, like my sister was big into plays and shit, and every once in a while I get taken to a play and you eat lunch somewhere like down there, and like When I was a kid, I always remembered this experience being disappointing because it'd always be like, oh, that's like this person over there, and it was just like they were never an actor who meant anything to me. I was like, it can't be Steven Seagal, huh? We couldn't run into Steven Seagal out here. We couldn't run into Macho Man Randy Savage.
Yeah.
Like, tell me something I get excited for. But then I remember a similar thing happening to me in like my 20s, where somebody was like, all I remember was that it was some actress on some show on the WB, and I was like, oh, okay. Like not Gilmore Girls, but like Gilmore Girls. Yeah. And like I remember like people I was with being like, oh, like this girl's out like at this bar we're at, and I was just like, you said a name, like the name is supposed to mean something to me. Do we know her? Like, is she in our friend group? And they were like, no, she's on like this show. And it was like, man, I don't even know if that's a real show. You could have just made up that show right now. And then so it was like, did I miss the period where I just know who famous people are?
Yeah. You just reminded me of this story. I was on a plane once as probably like 12 or something. Preteen, let's say. Tween. And I was sitting
Tween
there.
Chad Dundas.
I was sitting there in my
Just
seat.
Picture that.
I was doing my stuff. We were in coach, obviously.
Doing your stuff.
People were getting on the plane. This guy was all decked out in WWF stuff, came and sat down on the plane. This guy that I was like, I looked at him and I was like, is that Jimmy Hart? Is that Jimmy Hart from the WWF came and sat on the plane? And I was like looking at him.
In coach?
Yeah, that's the thing. I was looking at him and I was like, would Jimmy Hart be flying coach? And I was like,
maybe.
And then I was like, no, that's not Jimmy Hart. And then like 2 minutes later, the curtain from first class pulls back. Macho Man Randy Savage steps through the curtain and goes, Jimmy Hart, and then steps back in and goes and sits down. And I was just like, what?
Hold on.
I got Randy the Macho Man Savage's autograph at the airport in Dayton after that.
I've known you for like 15 years.
I'm sure I've told you that story.
You have never told me that story.
You probably just don't remember it.
Well, probably the circumstances in which you would tell me a story like that. That does make sense. Dakwasan says, early thoughts about Whitaker versus Stylebender.
We've talked about it a little bit. I think we are in agreement that it just seems like Robert Whitaker is a little bit too complete and a little bit too big for the Stylebender.
Yeah.
Although that's an awesome fight.
Yes.
Like you can't say that that's not an awesome fight.
Your boy's going to be there.
That's right.
Book my tickets and everything. Man, I really hope that one stays together.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel Adesanya does enough exciting, fun, difficult stuff to prepare for that I'm not going to ever rule out the possibility that he just pulls out something weird and crazy and catches Robert Whitaker.
Absolutely.
I think if it goes 5 rounds, though, where everybody is at 100% and giving all they have to give, it's hard for me to see how he beats Robert Whitaker. I think, like you said, he's just too good everywhere. I think he's kind of got him surrounded.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely can't count out the possibility that Israel Adesanya is going to win that fight, but I think Robert Whitaker is going to be the favorite for a reason.
Devin Scott says, is Henry Cejudo's intergender championship shtick the fucking worst thing you have heard so far this week? He needs a damn intervention with this king of cringe bullshit. Thoughts?
Okay, here's the thing. Just like Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman leading up to their fight, I have not watched any of this bullshit, and I plan not to.
I've only heard about it through Twitter.
And
even then, I actively resist investigating it further.
Right. He's going back and forth with Valentina Shevchenko, right?
But it doesn't seem like, okay, again, this is coming from somebody who has purposely taken 0 steps to learn more about it.
Right.
Is it not tongue-in-cheek?
That's what I'm saying.
Like, it would have to be, right?
Well, and it's Henry Cejudo, so you know he's doing it on like some Andy Kaufman, like king of cringe thing.
Yeah.
It
like,
can't
he doesn't
be taken any
actually
more
want to get in
seriously
there
than
and
that.
fight her, and he doesn't actually think that that's a possibility. I think that he just would be having fun with the idea.
Right. That's what I think too. But how would I know? Because I haven't watched it.
Yeah. Logan Smith says, I've been watching significantly less UFC lately because lately I just can't feel good about giving Dana White my money. I never really liked it, and there's always a moral trepidation in being a fan of combat sports. But now that they have put a paywall on their paywall, that is just enough friction to cause me to think, do I really want to help Dana White ship snow to Vegas and book Gwen Stefani for his birthdays while the labor is underpaid and likely brain damage? How common do you think my experience is? Not uncommon,
Yeah.
I would say. Especially, I think this is one of the instances where the UFC would maybe be better served to have Dana White less visible. So it wasn't such a clear connection to make between being like, okay, you're asking for more of my money to continue watching this thing I love. Meanwhile, I keep hearing about the lavish lifestyle being led by the company president. Also, meanwhile, I keep hearing about the persistent problem of low fighter pay. Mike Perry has got $6 in the bank after he got his whole shit broke. It like, if you're reading about it at all, it's not hard to connect those dots and start to feel like, wait a minute, am I a part of something bad here? Or it's probably easier to justify piracy. I guess is the other part of it. Like if there's an event you do want to watch and you're like, well, maybe I don't feel good about illegally streaming stuff, but if I can tell myself like, hey, Dana White's just going to spend it on big birthday bash stuff for himself, like he's a damn third world dictator, then that's all the justification I need to go around the paywall.
Yeah, and I think that the UFC, well, I think, not that it necessarily relates specifically to Dana White, but I think that the UFC definitely made that gamble when they moved all of their stuff behind the ESPN Plus paywall. And I think it was probably like an educated gamble on their part because right when they announced the deal, we talked about this on the show, that it seemed like if you were drifting away from your fandom of mixed martial arts, that this would be a good opportunity to make a clean break. That the idea that you were going to have to pay not only for ESPN Plus, but then also pay on top of that for the pay-per-views would probably be enough for the more casual fan and the people who felt themselves drifting away from the sport to just be like, either done or going to steal it from here on out. But I think that they made the gamble that number one, making $300 million a year for their broadcast rights probably takes some of the sting out of that punch. And I think that they also made the gamble that just being involved with ESPN would expose them to enough new people that they would eventually or essentially come out ahead.
Yeah. Tribeless says, can you see Reebok continuing their relationship with the UFC once this deal is done? It seems to have been one of the biggest sponsorship turkeys in sports history. It's a good question.
Early on,
we got to be getting close to it, right?
Unless they re-upped at some point. Early on, it was obviously kind of a disaster, and it was regarded really poorly by both fans and media publicly. I feel like at this point, though, like a lot of that has died down, don't you?
Right, but doesn't it still seem like... Do you think Reebok is making a bunch of money off of it? We've noticed every once in a while, like it's notable when you see a Reebok fight kit in the wild.
Yeah.
Is this just... You don't see many of them. Yeah. Even at like UFC events, you don't see a ton of them. It's hard for me to imagine that those things are really just flying off the shelves.
Yeah, I have no idea the actual like finances of the deal. And again, like Reebok might well consider it like if they are taking a loss on it, which I don't know. They might consider it like an investment of sorts, just sort of be like, we're not making the money back on this thing, but it basically gives us exclusive apparel rights across an entire sport or across an organization that makes up 80 to 90% of the market in this sport. So like, it's worth it for us to have the Reebok logo on every single thing that the UFC does. As far as the actual deal is concerned, like I said, it doesn't feel like people are as up in arms about it now as they were.
Yeah, you just can't sustain the outrage, I guess.
Yeah, and also like I think the Reebok stuff got a little better as they went.
Well, there's only one direction it could go, but yeah, it did get better.
Right, and it looks kind of like it got better by sort of boosting a style off Roots of Fight. They're like, all right, we're just gonna make our stuff look like these popular fighting Roots of Fight t-shirts. But at the same time, like the question of whether or not Reebok will stay is one thing, but like you're never going back to the day of third-party sponsors on shorts. You're never going back.
Condom Depot is never coming back to the UFC.
So like if it's not Reebok, it's going to be Nike or it's going to be Under Armour or it's going to be New Balance. Which it would be awesome if it was New Balance.
It would be awesome. Marco Bucci says, what we want to know is, was Big Booty Judy at the fair this year? I mean, I feel fairly confident she was. I didn't this time hear somebody call out across the fairgrounds, hey, Big Booty Judy. But I feel like Big Booty Judy is not the type to miss the fair. Powerhouse Papa says, hey, bros, I was kind of thrown by comments about Brendan Schaub's comedy on the CME Power Hour. We are all for these guys getting out of MMA while they still have their faculties. But when they attempt to do something else, we are merciless. Conor McGregor doesn't ever have to fight again. We should applaud that. I mean, I feel like that's kind of what we said, though, on the Power Hour, isn't it? That, like, even though we personally do not really enjoy the comedy stylings of Brendan Schaub and don't regard him as among one of our favorite stand-up comedians, I do feel like whenever I see a fighter get out of MMA, and especially when it's time for him to get out and get into something else that's a career that he can have without sacrificing his body and his brain, then I hope he's successful at it. That doesn't mean I want to watch the special, but I hope that he continues to do well for the audience that likes that.
Yeah,
Keep it away from me, but
I completely agree. And like Brendan Schaub is not a comedian that I will probably watch. I don't like watch a lot of stand-up comedy anyway, but like I don't necessarily find him to be all that funny. But at the same time, like you have to regard him as an amazing success story in terms of fighters that segue out of mixed martial arts and become successful at something else. Like he's obviously an amazing success story, and whether or not that, you know, he got a jump start by his friendship with Joe Rogan or not, like more power to the guy, frankly, for going out here and at least according to Chuck's profile of him on The Athletic, like seemingly making a bunch of money, being very successful, being a stand-up comedian. And I thought that is what we said about it on Monday. So I'm just reiterating that. And we got a bunch of mail. We got
Friday Power Hour.
Oh, Friday Power Hour. Yeah, like we got some mail from people being like, "Don't quit sucking up to Brendan Schaub" or whatever. So like, opinions are split on how we talked about Brendan Schaub.
As Dalton would say, opinions vary.
Opinions vary.
You know what? It was a weird thing that happened recently. I am Facebook friends with a woman I dated briefly in college, who I would describe as one of those people you date when you're young as a way of, whether you know it or not, figuring out what kind of people you like and don't like.
Okay.
You know. And I figured out I don't like that kind of person after like 3 months of dating her. And somehow we're Facebook friends, and she was posting about how much fun she had going to see Dane Cook live.
Just now?
Yeah.
Like recently?
Recently. Like within the last like month or so. And it was like, first of all, didn't even know he was still out there being a thing.
Give the guy credit, man.
Second of all, I'm not surprised, motherfuckers. If you told me that Dane Cook was still out there and I still had fans who were excited to go see him, I would guess that she would be one of those people. I mean, I'm glad she had a good time.
Yeah. Happy for her.
Mm-hmm. A lot of comments here on some people saying The Witch is awesome, some people saying The Witch sucks. Brady Griffin saying, I forgot to mention that it uses the language of the time that it's set in as well. You might want to watch it with subtitles if that's an option.
The Witch, you got to watch it with subtitles?
You don't have to.
So it's going to be scary and I'm not going to be able to understand it.
You can understand it fine. You can understand it.
Lost in Translation, you guys. A movie we can all agree on.
No. Boring. It's kind of boring. Not scary at all.
That's right. It's not scary at all. And I can understand what the people are saying.
We got
largely
just to see Chad get scared. Oh, Colleen says that James Franco and his brother made a movie last year about The Room called The Disaster Artist.
Yes.
Okay, I did hear about that. Maybe that's what I've heard of The Room for. Okay, here's a pretty good one to finish on here since we're coming up on an hour. Cat Pope. What's the best quote in the movie Predator? Is it the "don't got time to bleed" or the problematic sexual Tyrannosaurus line? I'm going to say, if it bleeds, we can kill it.
Yeah.
That's the line.
That's a good one, too. I mean, Predator is just awesome lines from start to finish, right? So take your pick. Although I ain't got time to bleed, obviously. That's the one that gets the most mileage.
It does get a lot of mileage. That's a good film.
Yeah.
Also, I remember as a kid reading the Predator comic books, which came out like after the movies were a success. And they just imagined the Predator in different other like historical conflicts, basically. Like Predator was in World War I, Predator was in Revolutionary War, like all like throughout history, basically. And as like a 11-year-old, it blew my fucking mind, and I just gobbled them up. I just like, you know, ride my bike down to the comic book / baseball card store and be like, let me know when you get more Predator comic books, because you have a buyer.
Here's my number.
Yeah. All right. You ready to shut this down and do some movie club?
Yeah. Thanks for showing up, everybody, for
Yeah.
the live chat. We'll do the movie club now about Heat, and then we'll be back on Friday for the Power Hour. Don't forget the Athletic textual live chat tomorrow at the Athletic website at 1 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, we'll probably be talking more about UFC 241 in specific on that one. Also, I'm going to put up the poll later today for the next movie club, so don't forget to vote for The Witch.
Vote for Lost in Translation. A different swing on the movie club.
See Chad shit himself from fear.
Nope, not doing that.